By the end of that night, more than 200 of Connecticut's wealthiest guests would leave the Voss estate convinced they had witnessed a maid threaten the future Mrs. Voss. They would all be wrong. Because the most dangerous thing that happened in that ballroom wasn't the moment Maya Chen stopped Delphine Castellane's hand. It was the split second she almost forgot the promise she'd made to herself 3 years earlier. Never become that woman again. The ballroom shimmered beneath towering crystal chandeliers, every corner dressed for a celebration that would dominate society magazines for weeks. Camera crews drifted between guests, capturing champagne toasts, laughter, and polished smiles for a lifestyle special featuring one of America's most influential billionaire families. No one expected the evening's most unforgettable moment to come from a maid. At the center of the room stood Delphine Castellane, breathtaking in an ivory couture gown tailored in Paris. In a few months, she would become Mrs. Elias Voss, the wife of the billionaire heir to the Voss global shipping empire. She carried herself with effortless confidence, accepting compliments as naturally as she accepted glasses of champagne. Maya Chen approached quietly, carrying a silver tray. Her uniform was immaculate, every strand of dark hair neatly secured, and she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years making sure people noticed the results of her work rather than the person doing it. Without appearing to look, she noticed everything. A photographer backing too close to an antique sculpture, a waiter struggling to balance an overloaded tray, a security guard adjusting the earpiece beneath his collar, an elderly guest beginning to lose his balance after one glass too many. She catalogued each detail instinctively before returning her attention to the champagne bottle in her hand. Old habits she'd spent years trying to forget. As she leaned forward to refill Delphine's glass, a single drop of champagne escaped the bottle and landed near the hem of the gown. It was barely noticeable, but Delphine noticed. The smile disappeared from her face. "So that's what passes for professional service in this house?" she asked, loudly enough for nearby conversations to stop. Maya immediately lowered the bottle. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. I'll have it cleaned immediately." Instead of stepping aside, Delphine took one slow step closer. "So everyone can watch you ruin something else?" A few nervous laughs drifted through the crowd. Most guests suddenly became fascinated by their drinks. No one wanted to become involved. Maya remained perfectly still. Humiliation only grew louder when someone fought back, and she'd learned that lesson a long time ago. Then Delphine grabbed her wrist. Hard. The crystal flute slipped from Maya's fingers and struck the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the ballroom. Every conversation stopped. The orchestra fell silent. Even the television cameras kept recording without their operators fully understanding why no one was moving anymore. "You people only learn when you're embarrassed," Delphine said, tightening her grip. "Maybe this will remind you where you belong." Across the ballroom, Elias Voss turned toward the sound. At first he assumed it was another minor mishap. Then he saw Delphine holding the maid by the wrist, and his expression tightened. Something about the scene unsettled him. Not because a member of the staff had made a mistake, but because the maid wasn't reacting the way frightened people usually did. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't apologizing again. She wasn't trying to pull away. She was breathing, slowly and steadily, almost as though she were waiting for something. Delphine raised her free hand. Several guests gasped. One of the cameramen instinctively zoomed in. For a single suspended heartbeat, Maya wasn't standing in the Voss ballroom anymore. She saw another room, another pair of furious eyes, another hand rushing toward her face, another life she'd sworn never to return to. Her body reacted before her memories could. Her fingers lifted and wrapped gently around Delphine's wrist. No twisting, no striking, no unnecessary force. The slap simply stopped. Delphine's eyes widened. She tried to pull her hand free. It didn't move, not because Maya was overpowering her, but because Maya's grip was impossibly precise. For the first time all evening, Delphine looked uncertain. Across the ballroom, Elias felt a chill he couldn't explain. He had trained with military veterans, former Secret Service agents, executive protection specialists, and he recognized disciplined movement when he saw it. Nothing about the quiet maid standing in front of him matched the resume she'd submitted 3 years earlier. A heartbeat later, Maya released Delphine's wrist as calmly as she'd taken it. She lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry your celebration was interrupted, ma'am." Then she knelt to collect the shattered glass, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But in that silent ballroom, one question had already taken hold. Who was Maya Chen? Before we go back to where it all began, if you're enjoying this story, I truly appreciate you subscribing. Stories like this take countless hours of research, planning, writing, and revision to create, and your support genuinely helps me keep bringing them to you. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 3 years earlier, Maya Chen arrived at the Voss estate carrying one small suitcase, a neatly organized resume, and a past she intended to leave buried forever. Everyone believed they had hired a maid. None of them realized they had welcomed a woman who had spent years running from the very skills that now threatened to expose her. What would you have done if you had witnessed Delphine raise her hand to strike Maya? Would you have stepped in, stayed silent, or assumed it wasn't your place? Let me know in the comments before we continue. 3 years earlier, the Voss estate looked less like a home and more like a private museum tucked behind 12-foot wrought iron gates in Greenwich, Connecticut. The mansion overlooked Long Island Sound, where cargo ships occasionally drifted across the horizon, a quiet reminder of the fortune that had built the Voss family name. Acres of manicured gardens surrounded the limestone estate, every hedge trimmed with mathematical precision, every window reflecting a house where perfection wasn't admired, it was expected. For most people, walking through those gates for the first time would have been intimidating. For Maya Chen, it was comforting. People searching for fugitives looked in crowded cities, abandoned warehouses, airports, and border crossings. They rarely looked behind the polished walls of a billionaire's mansion. The head butler, Arthur Pembroke, greeted her with the kind of professionalism that revealed decades of experience. "You'll find that discretion is valued here as highly as competence," he said as he led her through the servants' entrance. "The staff works together. We solve problems quietly. We don't attract attention." Maya offered a small nod. "I understand." It wasn't just an answer. It had become the philosophy she lived by. Arthur stopped outside a modest bedroom tucked beneath the east wing staircase. Simple, with a neatly made bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk, and a narrow window overlooking the service courtyard. "It isn't grand," he said apologetically. Maya set her suitcase beside the bed and smiled for the first time that day. "It's more than enough." She meant it. She had slept in far worse places. The following weeks settled into a rhythm so consistent it almost felt peaceful. She woke every morning before 5, and while most of the estate still slept, she brewed fresh coffee for the kitchen staff, ironed uniforms, polished silver until it reflected like mirrors, and prepared guest rooms before the first light reached the gardens. She never complained, never arrived late, never forgot an instruction, and within months everyone depended on her. If another maid became overwhelmed during a banquet, Maya quietly stepped in. If flowers arrived wilted before an important dinner, she found replacements before anyone upstairs noticed. When a young kitchen assistant burned herself pulling bread from the oven, Maya calmly cleaned the wound, wrapped it with practiced hands, and had the frightened girl back to work before panic could spread through the kitchen. "You've done that before," the assistant whispered. "My father believed everyone should know basic first aid." It wasn't a lie. It simply wasn't the whole truth. Outside of work, Maya lived with remarkable simplicity. Most of her paycheck disappeared into a small savings account. She owned little beyond a handful of practical clothes, several well-worn novels borrowed from the local library, and an old ceramic teacup with a hairline crack running through one side. It had belonged to her mother, and it was the only possession from her previous life she refused to leave behind. On Sunday afternoons, when she wasn't working, Maya walked to a nearby public park overlooking the water, where children chased pigeons and couples walked hand in hand and old men argued cheerfully over chess games that seemed to last for hours. She always chose the same bench beneath a maple tree, not for the view, but because it let her see every entrance to the park without turning her head. Even now, she couldn't stop doing it. One afternoon, an elderly man struggled to lift a fallen bicycle after his grandson tumbled onto the pavement. Before anyone else reacted, Maya was already kneeling beside the frightened boy. "Can I take a look?" she asked gently. The scrape on his knee wasn't serious, but tears streamed down his cheeks anyway. "You know what my grandmother used to tell me?" she said with a warm smile. He sniffled and shook his head. "She said brave people aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who stand back up." By the time his grandfather thanked her, the tears had disappeared. As Maya walked away, she didn't notice the elderly woman watching from another bench. But the woman noticed her, especially the way Maya scanned the park before crossing the street, and the way she instinctively positioned herself between the child and the road while speaking to him. People didn't develop habits like that by accident. Back at the Voss estate, Elias Voss barely noticed the woman who quietly kept parts of his household running. At 36, he had inherited leadership of Voss Global Shipping after his father's sudden retirement. Investors admired his discipline, employees respected his integrity, and business magazines regularly described him as one of America's most eligible billionaires. Unlike many men born into immense wealth, Elias disliked extravagance for its own sake. He knew every member of his household staff by name, thanked people who served his meals, and greeted gardeners and housekeepers with the same courtesy he offered board members. But his world moved at an unforgiving pace. Board meetings, international travel, charity galas, negotiations, and he saw Maya almost every day, yet he never truly saw her. That suited Maya perfectly. Being unnoticed meant being safe. Or at least that's what she believed. One rainy Thursday evening, as she finished folding freshly pressed shirts in the laundry room, Arthur appeared in the doorway holding a gold-embossed invitation. "The engagement gala has been moved up," he said. "Mr. Voss's fiancée requested a larger guest list." Maya looked up. "How many guests?" Arthur exhaled. "Over 200. He hesitated before adding quietly, "And from everything I've heard, Miss Delphine Castellane has very particular expectations." For reasons Maya couldn't explain, the uneasy feeling that settled in her chest had nothing to do with the extra work. It was the first time in 3 years that her instincts whispered the same warning they once had. Right before everything in her old life fell apart. Something was coming. And this time, she wasn't sure disappearing would be enough. If you were Maya, would you trust that uneasy feeling even though you couldn't explain it? Or would you dismiss it as anxiety from the past? The Voss estate transformed almost overnight. Florists arrived before sunrise, catering trucks lined the service entrance, and interior designers debated the placement of a single antique chair, as though it might decide the evening's success. For the household staff, the gala wasn't just another event. It was the biggest assignment of the year. Arthur gathered everyone Monday morning. "Miss Castellane has requested daily inspections of every guest room, dining area, and public space," he said. "She'll also be approving the service staff personally." A few knowing glances passed around the room. "Our responsibility isn't to agree with every request," Arthur added. "It's to make sure this house reflects the standards it's always been known for." Afterward, Rosa leaned into the pantry doorway while Maya polished silver. "Have you met her yet?" She introduced herself by asking why the hallway flowers were white instead of ivory. Maya laughed despite herself. "There it is," Rosa said, grinning. "Proof you know how to smile." Then, quieter. "Nobody actually knows anything about you." "There's not much to know," Maya said. "That's exactly what makes people curious," Rosa replied. That word stayed with her. For 3 years she'd built a life that inspired as little curiosity as possible. On time, hardworking, pleasant but brief. The fewer people who knew her, the fewer people could be hurt if her past ever caught up. 2 days before the gala, Delphine arrived to oversee final preparations, requesting different flowers in 3 rooms and new linens because the old ones looked uninspired. During a private fitting, she studied Maya for the first time. "You don't say much. I try to stay focused on my work. People are much easier to manage when they remember why they're employed," Delphine said, not looking away from the mirror. Maya nodded and released a slow breath once outside the room. She'd heard worse. What unsettled her wasn't the cruelty. It was that Delphine seemed to believe kindness and authority couldn't coexist. That night, Locking the silver pantry, Maya noticed one of the newer security guards watching her too closely in the servants' corridor. It should have meant nothing. Instead, for the first time in 3 years, she wedged a chair beneath her bedroom door before sleeping, one ear tuned to the hallway. A fear she'd spent years burying had begun to whisper again. What if someone had finally found her? Would the guard's behavior have worried you? Or would you have assumed it was coincidence? By morning, Maya told herself she was being irrational. 3 years of peace couldn't unravel over one glance. The feeling wouldn't leave anyway. 2 days out from the gala, the kitchen buzzed with pre-event chaos, and Rosa slid in beside her at the polishing station. I heard Miss Castellane made the florist cry. Apparently, the centerpieces were emotionally uninspired. The two laughed quietly, and Delphine, entering unnoticed, caught it instantly. If you two have enough free time to socialize, perhaps I should find more work for you. She picked up a glass, turned it in the light, and set it back down. Do it again. Later, during a fitting, Delphine asked, You've worked in wealthy homes before? No, ma'am. You don't seem intimidated. I try to do my work well. That's not what I asked, Delphine said, and for the first time she looked genuinely curious rather than annoyed, as if Maya had answered a question she never expected a maid to understand. That evening, in the employee parking lot, Maya opened a package of new work shoes and found the tissue paper already unfolded. The shoes removed, then carefully replaced. She looked around the empty lot. No one. The uneasy feeling returned with full force. Inside, Arthur quietly asked Elias for permission to rotate Maya away from floor duty during the gala, sensing Delphine had taken an unusual interest in her. It's as though she's waiting for Miss Chun to make a mistake. Elias refused. If Maya's done nothing wrong, we don't rearrange the staff because someone dislikes her. The right call, and one that meant Maya would spend the entire gala working feet away from Delphine. The night before the gala, in the garden, the same guard approached her. I've noticed you always seem alert, he said. My brother served in the Marines. He moved the same way you do. Maya offered a polite smile. I think you're mistaken, she said and walked away. Behind her, the guard spoke quietly into a hidden microphone. I've confirmed it. Maya never heard him. Somewhere, someone had just learned exactly where she'd been hiding, and the gala was less than 24 hours away. The morning of the engagement gala arrived wrapped in a gray Connecticut sky. By 6 o'clock, the Voss estate was already awake. Delivery trucks came and went through the service entrance. Florists carried in fresh arrangements to replace those installed the night before, and caterers assembled elaborate displays in the ballroom, while technicians tested lighting for the television crew arriving before sunset. The mansion no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage, and everyone inside knew exactly where they were expected to stand. Everyone except Maya. She tied the white apron around her waist with the same careful precision she used every morning, and studied her reflection in the small mirror in her room for a moment. The woman looking back seemed ordinary. Tired eyes, a simple uniform, hair pulled neatly into a low bun, no makeup beyond a touch of lip balm. Exactly the kind of person strangers forgot seconds after passing her. It had taken years to become invisible. She intended to stay that way. Downstairs, Arthur gathered the household staff one final time. I know tonight carries pressure, he said, looking around the room. Mistakes happen. If they do, fix them quietly and move forward. Remember why people trust this household. His eyes settled briefly on Maya. You've all earned your place here. It wasn't a speech. It was reassurance, and for reasons he couldn't explain, Arthur felt the staff needed it. By early evening, luxury cars swept through the estate gates carrying politicians, tech founders, professional athletes, philanthropists, and television personalities. Connecticut's social elite filled the ballroom beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, music drifting softly through the room as waitstaff moved with practiced grace between conversations worth millions of dollars. Maya blended into the rhythm effortlessly. Refill a glass, collect an empty plate, replace a napkin, disappear. She had done the same dance hundreds of times. Tonight felt different, not because of the guests, but because every few minutes she caught someone watching her. Sometimes the young security guard. Sometimes Delphine. Once, she looked up to find Elias observing her from across the ballroom before a board member interrupted him. None of them held her attention for long. Her instincts remained fixed elsewhere, and she couldn't explain why, only that the uneasy feeling she'd carried all week had settled into something heavier, like standing outside before a thunderstorm finally broke. Delphine, meanwhile, was determined that the evening unfold flawlessly. The gala wasn't simply a celebration. It was an announcement. The cameras, the magazine coverage, the influential guests, the beginning of the public life she'd imagined for years. Nothing and no one was going to distract from it. Then she noticed Maya again, moving with quiet confidence, never rushing despite the chaos around her. Something about it irritated Delphine, not because Maya had done anything wrong, but because she never seemed intimidated. Everyone else adjusted themselves around power. Maya simply acknowledged it. To Delphine, that felt dangerously close to disrespect. "Champagne," Delphine said, extending her empty flute. Maya approached immediately. "Of course, Miss Castellane." She uncorked a fresh bottle while the conversation around them continued, laughter and music and camera shutters. Then someone behind Maya stumbled after brushing against another guest, and the slight bump shifted the angle of the bottle. One tiny drop of champagne landed near the bottom of Delphine's ivory gown, barely enough to darken the fabric. Maya saw it instantly. "So sorry," she said. "Let me have someone treat it before it leaves a mark." She reached for a clean linen cloth. Delphine looked down, then slowly back up. Her smile vanished. "You've got to be kidding me." Nearby conversations began to fade. "It was an accident," Maya replied calmly. "Do you know how much this gown cost?" "I understand your frustration." "No," Delphine said, stepping closer. "You don't." The room grew quieter. Several guests turned discreetly toward the exchange, and a television camera, filming general ballroom footage, drifted naturally in their direction. Delphine noticed, and something inside her refused to let the moment end quietly. "You people are unbelievable." Maya remained still. "I apologize." "You apologize because it's expected." Delphine grabbed Maya's wrist, hard enough that several nearby guests visibly flinched. "You ruined my dress." Her voice rising. During the most important night of my life, the ballroom fell almost completely silent. Arthur immediately started toward them. Elias looked up from a conversation with one of the foundation's donors, his expression changing the instant he understood what he was seeing. "Delphine," he called. She didn't hear him, or pretended not to. Instead, she shoved Maya backward, and the silver tray slipped from her hands. Crystal glasses exploded across the marble floor, the sound echoing beneath the chandeliers. Someone gasped. A violinist stopped playing mid-note. Arthur froze. Every camera lens turned toward the commotion. Delphine pointed toward the kitchen. "Get out." Maya quietly bent to gather the broken glass. "I'm cleaning it now." "I said get out." When Maya didn't immediately move, Delphine's humiliation transformed into anger. She reached down, grabbed Maya by the arm again, and yanked her upright. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." "No, Miss Castellane," Maya said, her voice remarkably steady. "I'm trying to prevent a larger scene." That single sentence landed harder than an insult. Delphine's cheeks flushed, and without thinking, she raised her hand. Time seemed to slow. Across the ballroom, Elias pushed through the crowd. "Delphine!" Arthur took another step forward. Several guests instinctively reached for their phones. The television crew never stopped recording. Maya stared at the hand coming toward her, and for one impossible heartbeat the ballroom disappeared. She smelled damp concrete, heard the echo of fists striking heavy bags, felt her father's calm voice. "The strongest fighter isn't the one who wins. It's the one who knows exactly when not to fight." Delphine's hand came closer. Maya had a choice. Take the slap or reveal a part of herself she'd buried long ago. Her body chose before her mind did. Her hand rose, not fast, not violently, almost gently, and her fingers closed around Delphine's wrist with flawless precision. The slap stopped inches from her face. Delphine blinked, confused. She tried to pull away. She couldn't, not because Maya was hurting her, but because every tiny movement had been neutralized before it began. No twisting, no bruising, no aggression. Just complete control. A silence settled over the ballroom unlike anything Elias had ever experienced. He had trained with military instructors, former intelligence officers, executive protection specialists, and he recognized disciplined movement instantly. What Maya had just done couldn't be improvised. Delphine looked into Maya's eyes, and for the first time since entering the Vasa state, she saw no fear, only restraint. Then Maya quietly released her, lowered her gaze, and said softly enough that only those nearest could hear, "I'm sorry this evening has become more difficult than it needed to be." She stepped back, not in surrender, in mercy. Elias reached them seconds later. He looked from Delphine to Maya, then down at the shattered crystal scattered across the marble floor. Nothing in the room made sense anymore, because one question now drowned out every other thought in his mind. Who had he really invited into his home 3 years ago? If you had been Elias in that moment, would your first concern have been Delphine's public humiliation, or discovering why an ordinary maid possessed the discipline and training to stop an attack without throwing a single punch? For several long seconds, no one moved. The ballroom remained frozen beneath the glow of the crystal chandeliers, the silence almost louder than the orchestra that had stopped playing. A champagne flute rolled across the marble floor before finally settling against the leg of a banquet table. Only then did reality begin creeping back into the room. The guests started whispering. "What just happened? Did you see that?" She caught her hand. No, she controlled it. Phones that had been discreetly lowered moments earlier were now raised again, and although the television crew had cut away from the confrontation the instant it became physical, dozens of guests had already recorded enough to fuel tomorrow's headlines. Delphine slowly pulled her arm back and looked down at her wrist. There wasn't a bruise, not even a red mark, and that unsettled her more than if Maya had hurt her. She had felt the strength. She had felt the absolute certainty behind that grip. And yet the maid had chosen not to use it. Her embarrassment instantly searched for somewhere to land. "You assaulted me," Delphine said, her voice trembling, not with pain but with humiliation. Maya remained perfectly still. "I stopped you from striking me. You grabbed me. I prevented harm." The calmness in Maya's voice only deepened Delphine's frustration. "You admit it." "I do." Another ripple of whispers passed through the guests. No excuses, no panic, no attempt to deny what everyone had witnessed. Only quiet honesty. Elias finally stepped between them. "That's enough." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Years of leading boardrooms and negotiating billion-dollar acquisitions had taught him that true authority rarely required shouting. He looked first at Delphine. "You raised your hand." It wasn't what it looked like. It was exactly what it looked like. For the first time that evening, Delphine seemed genuinely caught off guard. "You aren't taking my side? I'm taking the side of what happened." The words landed heavily between them. Arthur quietly instructed several staff members to clean the broken crystal while the orchestra resumed playing, uncertainly at first, before the music gradually filled the ballroom again. Most guests pretended to return to their conversations. Almost none of them actually did. Every eye kept drifting back toward the small group near the center of the room. "Maya," Elias said gently, "would you come with me, please?" She hesitated only briefly. "Yes, sir." Arthur accompanied them as they walked toward Elias's private library. Behind them, Delphine remained standing in the ballroom, stunned that the evening she had spent months planning was slipping beyond her control. The library door closed quietly. Outside, the gala continued. Inside, the room felt strangely peaceful, books lining every wall, a fire crackling softly in the stone fireplace despite the mild autumn evening. For several moments, no one spoke. Elias finally broke the silence. "Are you hurt?" The question surprised Maya. She glanced at the faint redness beginning to form around her wrist where Delphine had grabbed her. "I'll be fine." Arthur noticed the mark, his jaw tightening. "So she did leave a bruise." It's nothing serious. Elias looked at her carefully. You could have injured her. Yes. But you didn't. No. Why? For the first time since entering the room, Maya seemed uncertain, not because she feared the question, but because she had spent years avoiding the answer. My father taught me something a long time ago, she said, looking down briefly before continuing. He believed strength wasn't measured by how quickly you could win a fight. She met Elias's eyes again. It was measured by how many fights you could end without one. The room fell quiet again. Arthur exchanged a brief glance with Elias. Neither man had expected that answer. Elias leaned forward slightly. Where did you learn to move like that? A pause, long enough to become an answer itself. I'm sorry, Mr. Voss, she said, her voice remaining respectful. I can't talk about my past. You can't. She corrected herself. I won't. There was no defiance in the statement, only finality, and Elias recognized it immediately. Some questions weren't being avoided because they were inconvenient. They were being protected because they carried pain. Before he could respond, a firm knock interrupted them. Arthur opened the door. The young security guard stood outside. I apologize for interrupting. His eyes briefly met Maya's, then shifted back to Elias. Sir, I believe there's something you need to see. Minutes later, they entered the estate's security office, where multiple surveillance monitors covered one wall. The head of security, Marcus Hale, stood waiting. Unlike the younger guards, Marcus had spent nearly 3 decades in executive protection, much of it working alongside federal agencies before retiring into private security. He nodded respectfully to Elias. Sir, you said there was a problem. Marcus pressed a button, and footage from the ballroom appeared on the largest monitor, the confrontation replaying from 3 different camera angles. No sound, only movement. Marcus paused the video just as Maya intercepted Delphine's wrist. I've reviewed this frame by frame, he said. Elias remained silent. Her response time was approximately 0.2 of a second. Another click, the footage advancing slowly. She redirected the strike, neutralized the joint, stabilized her own balance, protected the surrounding guests. He looked directly at Elias, and never once attempted to retaliate. The room was silent. Marcus folded his hands behind his back. I've trained federal protective teams, he said, choosing his next words carefully. I couldn't teach someone to do that in 3 years. That level of discipline usually takes a lifetime. Elias looked toward Maya. She hadn't moved, hadn't defended herself, hadn't interrupted. Marcus spoke one final sentence. Whoever Miss Chun used to be, she wasn't ordinary. The words settled heavily over the room, not as an accusation, but as a realization. Elias looked at Maya again, but this time his curiosity had changed. He was no longer trying to uncover a scandal. He was trying to understand a woman who had every opportunity to hurt someone and instead had chosen extraordinary restraint. Because suddenly, the question wasn't whether Maya had been hiding something. The question was why someone with skills like hers had chosen to spend the last 3 years quietly serving others instead of living the life she was clearly capable of having. If someone showed incredible skill but used it only to protect others instead of gaining power, would that make you trust them more, or wonder even more about the life they left behind? By the time the engagement gala ended, the story had already escaped the walls of the Voss estate. Guests who had promised discretion quietly shared videos with close friends, and within hours a local entertainment blogger posted a grainy 15-second clip showing Delphine raising her hand, and the maid calmly stopping it without striking back. The clip spread fast. The headlines weren't flattering. One outlet ran with "Billionaire's fiancée appears to try to slap Maid at engagement gala." Another asked, "Who is the mystery maid everyone is talking about?" A third framed it as a broader question about how domestic workers were treated behind closed doors. Most of the footage cut off before anyone could see what happened next, so the internet filled in the gaps with speculation. Some viewers were convinced Maya was a bodyguard posing as a maid. Others insisted she'd served in the military. A few guessed she'd once fought professionally. Almost everyone agreed on the same thing, though. She'd shown remarkable restraint. Inside the estate, There was no room left for speculation. Only facts. The next morning, Elias called together everyone who had witnessed the confrontation firsthand. Arthur, Marcus, Chef Lorenzo, Rosa, 2 servers, 3 members of security, even the producer who'd been filming inside the ballroom. Every account lined up. Not perfectly, because memory rarely works that way, but on the essential points there was no disagreement. Delphine had berated Maya publicly. She'd grabbed her hard enough to leave bruises. She'd tried to strike her, and Maya had stopped it, nothing more, nothing less. When Delphine arrived for the meeting, she expected comfort. Instead, she found a folder waiting on the table, printed witness statements, stills from the security footage, and a medical report. Arthur had insisted Maya see a doctor after the gala, and the physician had documented bruising around her wrist consistent with a forceful grip. Delphine looked up slowly. "You had her examined?" "I wanted facts," Elias said. "You don't believe me." "I believe evidence." Her expression hardened. "So that's it then?" "No," he said. "This isn't about one argument. It's about a pattern." Arthur set another set of documents on the table, staff complaints, anonymous at first, then signed, dozens of them. None described violence. What they described instead was quieter and, in its own way, more damaging. Public humiliation, belittling remarks, impossible standards, and a kind of intimidation that wore people down over time until they started to believe they mattered less. Delphine stared at the pages. "They're employees. They're people," Elias said. The room went quiet. "I've spent years building companies around one principle," he continued. "Every person deserves dignity." He looked at her directly. "Yesterday I realized I failed to defend that principle inside my own home." Delphine looked away, and for the first time since the gala, her anger gave way to something quieter. It wasn't the headlines that had gotten to her. It was that the man she'd hoped to marry had seen a version of her she could no longer pretend wasn't real. After a while, she spoke almost to herself. "My mother believed kindness made people take advantage of you." No one interrupted. "In our house, staff existed to serve. If they got comfortable, they stopped respecting boundaries." Elias understood, in that moment, that she wasn't making excuses. She was describing the only version of the world she'd ever been taught. It explained her behavior. It didn't excuse it. "I understand where those beliefs came from," he said gently. "But I can't build a life around them." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded, barely. "I suppose neither can I." She slid the engagement ring off her finger, and the diamond caught the morning light before she set it on the table. "I'm not the person you thought you were marrying." Elias looked at the ring, then back at her. "I don't think you're beyond changing." She gave a sad smile. "But that's changing I have to do on my own." She stood, and Arthur opened the door for her without a word. In the hallway, she found Maya just arriving to start her morning duties, and for a few seconds neither woman spoke. Then Delphine's eyes dropped to the faint bruise still marking Maya's wrist. "I'm sorry," she said. "No cameras this time. No audience. Just 2 women standing in a quiet hallway." Maya studied her face. The arrogance she'd seen for weeks was gone, and what was left looked like someone confronting herself for the first time. "I'm willing to accept your apology," she said. "But I hope one day every person who works for you never has to earn basic respect." Delphine nodded slowly. "So do I." Then she walked away without looking back. That afternoon, Elias gathered every employee of the Voss estate in the ballroom, not to celebrate but to own up to a failure. "I owe all of you an apology," he began. "I assumed that because I believed in respect, respect naturally existed under my roof. I was wrong." He announced a confidential employee advocacy office, an independent reporting channel, mandatory dignity training for anyone in a supervisory role, and anonymous reviews that would come straight to him instead of filtering through layers of management. Then he found Maya in the crowd. "I also owe one particular employee my gratitude," he said. "You reminded me that real strength isn't proving you're powerful. It's choosing not to use power when you don't have to." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. For Maya, it was more recognition than she'd sought in 3 years, and it meant more precisely because she'd never asked for it. Engagement question. Do you think Delphine deserved a second chance after a sincere apology? Or are there some actions that permanently change how we see a person? Let me know in the comments. The headlines disappeared within a week the way they always did. A celebrity divorce took their place, then a scandal in Washington, then a championship game nobody could stop talking about. The internet moved on. Life did too. But inside the Voss estate, the changes stayed, and not because anyone had announced them in a memo. People could just feel it. Arthur noticed it first. Housekeepers who used to keep their eyes down now greeted each other with easy smiles. Kitchen staff laughed without going silent the moment footsteps approached, and new hires were welcomed instead of quietly tested. It wasn't a perfect workplace. No workplace ever is. But it was an honest one, and that made all the difference. Maya expected things to go back to normal. Instead, one quiet Tuesday morning, Arthur knocked on her door and told her Mr. Voss wanted to see her. She followed him to the library, the same room where Elias had once asked about her past. This time there was no security in the room, no lawyers, no tension. Just 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. Elias stood as she came in. "Thank you for coming." He slid an envelope across the desk. "I was offered information about you." Maya's face didn't change, but her heartbeat slowed. Someone had found her. Again. "I didn't open it," he said. She looked up. "You didn't." He shook his head. "If there's a story you're ready to tell someday, it should be because you chose to tell it." He pushed the envelope a little closer. "And if not, then your past belongs to you, not to whoever's selling it." Maya stared at the envelope for a long moment. 3 years of expecting every knock at the door to be the one that unraveled the quiet life she'd built. 3 years of believing that if people learned who she'd once been, they'd stop seeing who she'd become. She picked it up and, without opening it, dropped it into the fireplace. The paper curled almost instantly, and the flames took it until nothing was left but ash. Elias watched without a word. Some histories are better left where they fall. Months later, the Voss Foundation launched a new initiative for survivors rebuilding their lives after violence and trafficking. Housing, education, job placement, counseling, and self-defense training taught by certified instructors. When reporters asked Elias what had inspired it, he just said he'd been reminded that people are often carrying battles no one else can see. He never mentioned Maya's name. She'd earned privacy, not a headline. Maya stayed at the estate for another year, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because for the first time in a long while, she had somewhere she actually wanted to stay. She started mentoring new hires, remembering their names, noticing when someone looked overwhelmed before they said a word. Rosa joked that she'd become the calm in every storm. Even Chef Lorenzo admitted the kitchen just ran smoother when she was in it. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost a year to the day after the gala, Maya walked through the gardens with a basket of cut flowers and stopped by the fountain. The same fountain where she'd once stood, convinced someone had finally tracked her down. This time she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She was just listening to the water. Elias joined her a few minutes later. "You know," he said, "Marcus still swears you could take out half his security team." She almost smiled. "Let's hope we never find out." They laughed, the easy kind of laugh shared by people who no longer owe each other explanations. As they turned back toward the house, a young housekeeper dropped a stack of folded linens near the terrace, and before she could even apologize, 3 co-workers were already down on the ground helping her gather them, laughing about it instead of scolding her. Maya watched for a second, then kept walking. She used to believe the only way to survive was to disappear completely. Now she knew better. It isn't about staying invisible. It's about ending up somewhere the people who notice you choose to be kind anyway.